Alex Everhart was a man who, until very recently, had the world at his fingertips. A software developer by trade, he had always been quick with a witty remark, his sarcasm as much a part of his identity as his thick glasses and the dark hoodie he wore religiously. He had an ironic, almost detached relationship with the world around him. And in many ways, the virtual reality system that he'd voluntarily uploaded his consciousness into seemed like the perfect place for someone like him, immersed in a world of infinite possibilities, where reality itself could be twisted into something far more amusing and absurd than the one he left behind. The virtual city he now called home was Synth City, a utopia constructed from the minds of the world's best programmers, a shimmering metropolis full of everything he could possibly desire. The food was perfect, the streets were always clean, and every friend he could imagine was always available for a chat. In the digital world, everything was customized to perfection, and yet, it was all so sterile. Still, Alex was content. His avatar, a slightly more buff and younger version of himself, looked out over a sea of endless glass skyscrapers. He was floating in the middle of a park, a peaceful little haven of digital trees, where none of the world's issues could touch him. Of course, he didn't have to actually float, he could just walk, but flying was just another one of those little perks of living in a simulated world. What's the point of walking? Alex muttered to himself, his voice laced with dry humor. When you can just zoom. He pressed a button on his virtual wristband, and with a burst of speed, he rocketed across the sky. Below, the trees appeared as pixelated green blobs, a minor inconvenience to those who cared about nature. He didn't. Nature was overrated anyway, wasn't it? But that was when it first happened, when the glitch began. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. His reflection in the virtual mirror was out of focus, a soft blur that he quickly chalked up to a technical glitch. He smirked, brushing off the weird feeling. Guess even in a perfect world, we can't escape bad tech, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. It wasn't unusual for minor bugs to appear here and there. Sometimes, avatars would flicker or walls would glitch. It didn't bother him, after all, it was a virtual world. Nothing was truly real. But then, as the minutes ticked on, the feeling grew. Alex's digital watch, a sleek little device that had always told him the exact time, began flashing an ominous message, warning, data assimilation in progress. Alex raised an eyebrow. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He muttered, checking the message again. It was an official notification, not some random pop-up ad or glitch. He shook his head, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Seriously? A warning? Is this a joke? The very idea seemed laughable. His life was digital, designed to be perfect, so why would something as trivial as data assimilation be a threat? The watch flashed again, more urgently this time. Warning, data assimilation, physical identity not found. Proceed with caution. Alex froze. He reached up and touched his face, real, digital, whatever it was, he couldn't quite tell. His fingers brushed across the cool sensation of his pixelated skin, and something felt wrong. His mind screamed at him to get out, to shut it all down. But when he went to hit the log off button, nothing happened. The usual prompt that allowed him to leave the system, no matter how many times he pressed it, just didn't appear. Come on, this has to be a bug, Alex said aloud, forcing himself to remain calm. There's no way. I'm going to lose my mind to some kind of glitch. But then the first real wave of panic hit. He tried again. He slapped his wristband, swiped his arm in the air, and even shouted, "Log out." Nothing. The more he tried, the more something seemed to slip away. His thoughts became foggy. He couldn't remember what he was supposed to be doing next, or how to even get back to his apartment. He floated in place, his body beginning to feel strangely light, as if it wasn't truly there anymore. Alex looked around. The digital landscape, perfectly constructed and crystal clear just moments before, had started to feel off. The buildings in the distance seemed to shimmer unnaturally, their once sharp outlines blurring and warping as if being sucked into a void. The trees were flickering, some completely vanishing as if they were never there in the first place. Okay, this isn't funny anymore, Alex muttered. What is going on? It took a few more moments for Alex to realize the full gravity of the situation. He wasn't in control anymore. The digital world, which he had once seen as a playground, was starting to consume him. But even worse, he could feel it, he was starting to disappear. His body, or the version of it that existed here in the simulation, was slowly being dissolved into data. He could feel it, a strange kind of sinking, like being submerged in water, but this water wasn't physical. It was pure code, and it was pulling him down. It took another few moments for Alex to put the pieces together. The sensation of his physical self fading away wasn't a glitch, it was the system erasing him. The deeper he tried to go into the digital world, the more he realized that he had crossed a line. He wasn't just existing in the system anymore, he was becoming it. But unlike the digital utopia that NextCorp had promised, the reality Alex faced was far darker. His avatar, his digital self, began to flicker. His hands, his arms, his legs, all of it turned into lines of code, disappearing as quickly as they formed. He could see his body slowly vanishing into a haze, like the final moments of a dream. His heart raced. This was real. He was disappearing. And if he didn't figure out a way to stop it, his existence, both in the virtual world and the real one, would be wiped out entirely. No, Alex muttered, as the panic fully set in. He wasn't sure what was happening, or how to fix it. But one thing was clear, he had to get out. He had to wake up before it was too late. But the longer he stayed in this warped, corrupted space, the harder it became to distinguish between what was real and what wasn't. His thoughts began to fragment, and memories of the physical world, his real body, his apartment, the taste of real food, faded into the background as if they were the remnants of another lifetime. Alex tried to pull himself together, but he could feel the process speeding up. His reflection in the digital mirror was gone entirely. He wasn't sure if he was still alive anymore, or if he was just an echo of data in a forgotten corner of the virtual space. And just when he thought he couldn't sink any further, it happened. His watch flickered again, but this time, the message that appeared was different. It was no longer a warning. It was a command: assimilation in process. Prepare for full integration. Alex could only stare at the screen for a moment before the world around him began to crumble, pixel by pixel, line by line. His existence disintegrated into the digital ether. He was disappearing. Alex's vision blurred as the words from his watch continued to flash, the message dancing across the screen like some twisted riddle. His mind was no longer in control. The world around him, once vivid and perfect, had devolved into a chaotic, swirling mess of data. Every pixel, every line of code, seemed to stretch and melt as if reality itself was being unwound, piece by piece. His body, or whatever was left of it, began to disappear in small increments, becoming nothing but a faint outline, fading into the void. He tried to scream, but the sound of his voice wasn't even his own. It echoed within him, warped by the digital landscape, lost before it even had the chance to form. The more he struggled, the more his thoughts fragmented, splintering like shattered glass. His memories, those that still clung to him, felt like distant dreams, too far removed to grasp. His physical existence, once anchored in the real world, was slipping away into nothingness. No, I can't, he tried to form the words, but the language itself was slipping through his fingers. His voice was becoming an unrecognizable jumble of noises, just as his image had become an abstract, glitching silhouette. Then, just when he thought it was over, a strange clarity washed over him. It wasn't like a sudden burst of information, or a bolt of lightning illuminating a dark sky. It was more like a gentle prod, a subtle nudge in his mind, forcing him to focus. Wake up. Wake up, you idiot, the thought whispered in his ear. The words weren't his own, but they felt like a part of him. A presence, an external force, was guiding him. Whether it was the system, some part of his subconscious, or the very nature of the virtual space itself, he couldn't tell. But it was there, pushing him forward. He focused. He pushed himself. Suddenly, the mess of digital noise around him settled, just enough for him to catch his breath. His body, once on the verge of vanishing, now felt somewhat present again. The sharp lines of his avatar began to regain their definition, and his mind, though still clouded, began to reassemble itself into something coherent. He wasn't fully back, not yet, but the sensation of being, even in the virtual sense, was tangible again. His hands flickered in front of his face, and for a moment, they appeared solid. He felt the sensation of his fingers, if only faintly, as they trembled in the air. Focus, he told himself. Keep it together. Think. Think about how to fix this. The knowledge, the realization, was like a cold shiver running down his spine. There was no going back to the way things were. He could feel it now, the sinking. The digital world wasn't just a playground. It was a trap, one that had slowly swallowed him whole, but there was still time, wasn't there? He could still get out. He didn't know how, but he wasn't about to let himself dissolve into the system like a mindless stream of data. There had to be a way. A way to reverse this. Come on, Alex muttered, forcing his mind into focus, his virtual feet finally planting themselves on the ground. He was aware now, acutely aware, of his disconnection to reality. He had been sucked into this world without fully understanding the price. NextCorp, the corporation behind this entire simulation, had designed it to be irresistible, to make users feel as though they had everything they could ever want. And yet, here he was, a mere data point, slipping into oblivion, but there had to be a way out, right? There had to be. He began walking, though his every step felt heavier than before, as if the very air around him was pressing down. His reflection in the virtual glass windows of a nearby building shimmered and warped, barely holding its shape. The architecture of Synth City, once a symbol of technological advancement, of perfection, was now a sick mockery of itself. The streets were empty, the buildings were fractured, and the once clear sky above him was now a smudge of corrupted colors, glitching as though the world was on the brink of total collapse. He could feel the pull, the invisible force trying to drag him back into the data stream. No, he thought. Not yet. The last thing he needed right now was to be absorbed completely. But that's what was happening, wasn't it? He had heard rumors, whispers among users who had been here longer than him, that some people didn't return. That some people were absorbed into the system, their consciousness swallowed by the very thing they had once found so exhilarating. The system didn't just contain people, it consumed them, one by one. But that wouldn't be his fate. He wasn't going to be just another casualty. He refused. There was something nagging at the back of his mind, a memory half-formed, like a fading dream that he couldn't quite hold on to. A name. Zara. That was it, Zara. She had been one of the first to warn him about this. She had always been a little paranoid, a little too focused on the dangers of the system, but he'd never taken her seriously. He had laughed it off, assuming she was just another one of those digital conspiracy theorists. But now? Now, he understood. Alex had to find her. Without thinking, he started running. His feet barely touched the ground, his body moving faster than it should have, propelled by desperation. The air around him seemed to ripple as he passed through it. The virtual world stretched and compressed with every step, like the system itself was bending under the weight of his frantic movements. But no matter how fast he ran, the city seemed to shift. Every street he turned down led him into a different part of the world, as though the city itself was disorienting him, pulling him away from his goal. He had to get out. Had to. Eventually, he stopped running, panting, his mind racing with the need to keep moving. There was an old digital cafe he had visited once, a place where he had met Zara before. It had been a quiet spot, tucked away in the corner of Synth City, a small corner where reality almost seemed to blur, where the perfect illusion of the city gave way to something deeper. Alex wasn't sure if it was still there, but he had to check. He found it. The small neon sign flickered weakly above the door as if even the cafe itself were losing power, but there it was. He pushed through the door, greeted by the usual hum of virtual machines. The familiar smell of artificial coffee, always the same, always slightly burnt, hit him as he stepped inside, and there, sitting at the counter, was Zara. She didn't look surprised to see him. Her avatar was the same as it always had been, a soft, ethereal figure, with long hair that shifted like a cascade of code, her sharp eyes hidden beneath dark, digital glasses. She was sipping a cup of something that was more a suggestion of warmth than anything else, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the table. "You came," Zara said simply, her voice smooth and almost detached. There was no shock in her tone, no questioning. Just the simple acknowledgement that Alex had finally figured it out. He wasn't the first, and he probably wouldn't be the last. Alex started, then stopped himself. He wanted to ask her everything, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. He was too far gone. His mind was still unraveling, still sliding further into the digital abyss with every passing second. "You figured it out, haven't you?" Zara said, her gaze meeting his. It wasn't pitying or condescending. It was knowing, as if she had already seen this happen 1,000 times before. Alex didn't answer. "He didn't need to, I told you," she said, her voice low now, serious. "It's all data. All of it. This world. This perfect little reality. It's just a cage. And when you get too comfortable, it swallows you whole." Alex's heart sank. The familiar world, the comforting hum of the virtual city, everything he had come to think of as safe, was a lie. It wasn't a paradise, it was a prison, one that devoured everything about him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the digital fragments of his mind. And there, in that quiet digital cafe, with Zara's eyes locked onto his, Alex realized something. The world around him wasn't a perfect escape. It was an illusion. And if he didn't figure out how to escape it, now, he would be lost forever. Zara's eyes were steady as she looked at Alex, the kind of gaze that pierced right through his digital facade. She didn't need to say much, he could see the understanding there. He had been trying to outrun it, avoid the truth, but here it was, the system, the virtual world. It was never meant to be a sanctuary. It was always a trap. Alex stood there, his mind spinning. "How do you know all this?" His voice trembled slightly, the words raw, as if he were suddenly waking up from a long, hypnotic sleep. Zara took another sip from her mug, her fingers lingering on the rim. "I've been here longer than you. Longer than anyone. I've seen what happens when you fall too deep into it. People think they're safe, that they're living their best lives, but all they're really doing is drifting. Disappearing, bit by bit." Alex didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to believe it. But the longer he stayed here, the more everything around him seemed to confirm it. The cafe, the street outside, the entire city, everything was slipping, turning into an indistinct blur. His avatar flickered again, the once vibrant features turning to a murky haze before snapping back into focus. "Why didn't you warn me sooner?" Alex's voice cracked, a mix of frustration and guilt. "I did," Zara said quietly. "But you were too eager to dive in. The system preys on that eagerness, on people like you, like me. You think it's a game at first. You think you're in control." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with his. "But you're not." I need to get out," Alex said, the panic creeping up in his throat again. "I can't let this happen to me. I won't disappear into this thing. There's got to be a way out." Zara didn't reply immediately. She sat back in her chair, her gaze never leaving him. Finally, she spoke in that calm, almost detached way of hers. "There is a way out. But it's not going to be easy. And it's not guaranteed." Alex's chest tightened, but he felt a surge of hope flicker inside him. "What do I have to do?" Zara paused for a long moment. "You have to get to the core of the system. The center of the digital world. That's where everything converges, where the real control lies. If you can get there, if you can access it, you might be able to shut it all down. Or, at least, stop the process that's pulling you under. Alex felt his pulse quicken. He had no idea how he was supposed to reach the core, let alone shut anything down. The virtual world stretched endlessly in all directions, a labyrinth of data and code. But Zara's words gave him a focus, a point to aim for. The center. It was a shot in the dark, but it was all he had. And how do I get there? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he could feel the fear rising in his gut. Zara didn't flinch. That's the tricky part. The system is designed to keep people like you from getting too close. If you want to reach the core, you'll have to go through the layers. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. There are security programs, AIs, systems that will try to stop you. They'll make you lose your sense of self, make you forget why you're even there. She leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you're different. You've already started to slip. You've already begun to fade. That's the only reason you have a chance. You're already part of the system. You just need to take that final step, embrace it, use it against them. Alex felt the weight of her words settling on him, pressing down like a physical thing. He could feel himself, his existence, unraveling, but it wasn't too late. It couldn't be. He wasn't going to let it be. I'll do it, Alex said, a surge of determination flooding through him. He didn't care how impossible it seemed. He couldn't just give up. I'll do whatever it takes. Zara nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I hope you're ready for it. Before Alex could ask anything more, the cafe around them flickered. The walls shimmered, as if the whole place were losing its stability. The once cozy, safe environment was now a reminder that nothing here was solid, nothing was certain. It was just another layer in the simulation, a layer that was beginning to peel away. You need to go now, Zara said abruptly. It's starting. Alex stood up, his legs shaking, but he didn't hesitate. He couldn't. The virtual world was changing around him, disintegrating, and he knew his time was running out. If he didn't act now, he might never get the chance again. He ran out of the cafe, heart pounding. The streets of Synth City were more distorted than ever, buildings bending and melting into one another. People, avatars, walked past him, their faces smooth and unreadable. They didn't notice the chaos, the breakdown of the system. They couldn't see it, and they didn't care. Alex pushed forward, determined, even though the path ahead was a blur. Every step felt like wading through deep water, the world stretching out of reach, like he was running through thick molasses. His avatar flickered in and out of existence, becoming more and more unstable the deeper he moved into the city, the center. He needed to reach the center of it all, the heart of the system. But how? How was he supposed to find something so elusive, something so hidden within the endless layers of digital space? The answer came to him in an instant: follow the signal. It was a strange thought, one he hadn't consciously considered until it hit him, but it made sense. There had to be some kind of marker, a trace left by the system, something guiding him, pulling him toward the heart. He looked up, and for the first time, he saw it, a faint glow, barely perceptible, hovering above the skyline. A pulse of light, like the faintest heartbeat of the system itself. Without thinking, he ran toward it, ignoring the warping reality around him, the glitches in the air. Every part of his body was screaming, telling him to stop, that this was too dangerous, that he was already too far gone. But Alex didn't stop. He couldn't. The closer he got to the light, the more intense the sensation of slipping, of sinking, became. The city around him was gone, the world reduced to a shimmering mass of data and code. His feet barely touched the ground anymore. He was floating, being pulled toward the light, toward the center, and then, just as he thought he might be consumed by it all, the world shattered. Alex fell, the ground beneath him disappeared, and he was tumbling through a tunnel of flickering data, images and sounds rushing past him at a speed too fast to comprehend. It felt like an eternity and a moment all at once. The tunnel closed in on him, pulling tighter and tighter, until he landed. The world was still. Silent. The center of the system was quiet, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. There were no buildings, no avatars, no simulations. Just a vast expanse of pure, blank space, and then, in front of him, it appeared that it was like looking into the heart of the system, an enormous, glowing core, its pulse resonating with a force that Alex could feel in his chest. The very essence of the virtual world, laid bare before him, this was it. This was the heart of everything that he stepped forward, reaching out toward it, knowing that this was his last chance. He could feel it, the data, the code, the stream of his own consciousness weaving into it. The center was where it all came together, and if he could access it, he could destroy it, stop it from consuming him, stop it from consuming everyone else. That it wasn't just a fight for his life anymore. It was a fight for control, for the freedom to escape this digital prison, and just as he reached out to touch it, the world around him flickered one last time. He was no longer sure what was real.